Moscow is now openly threatening Azerbaijan with war, as they say in the Kremlin, following the example of Ukraine. Back on July 19th, the president of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, at an international media forum in Kankendi, voiced the main advice to Ukraine. As he put it, never agree to occupation, never surrender, and never accept violations of territorial integrity. Interestingly, Russian officials were also present at this event. And after that, Russian propaganda started pushing the topic of announcing a so-called special military operation against Azerbaijan. It got to the point where the Kremlin stated that they demand Baku to respect Russians in Azerbaijan, otherwise Russia is ready for military coercion. They began claiming that Azerbaijan, similar to Ukraine in their reasoning, was allegedly created by Lenin. And it's obvious that now Russia is losing all influence in the Caucasus. And now, the idea of a war against Azerbaijan is seen by some people as something unrealistic. Like, come on, what are you making up? But let me remind you, not everyone believed in a full-scale war between Russia and Ukraine either. It's sensible to discuss the potential for war and compare the military capabilities of the two countries and the probable theater of operations. My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's go through everything step by step. But friends, before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, give it a like, and leave any comment you want. This really helps a lot in promoting this video. Subscribe to my Telegram channel, the link to it is in the description of this video. And friends, if you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so financially with any donation on any platform you like. All the links and payment details are in the description of this video or by the QR code on your screens. I would be grateful for any support from you. So the tension in the relationship between Azerbaijan and Russia is escalating. And let me remind you, the day before, the president of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, stated that his country would appeal to international courts against Russia for the deliberate downing of an Azal Airlines plane in December of 2024. Do you know what the Kremlin did in response today? They promoted the commander of the 51st Air Defense Division of the 4th Guards Air Force and Air Defense Army of the Southern Military District of Russia, who gave the order to strike the civilian plane. He's been promoted more than once, and now he's being promoted again. In addition, on July 19th, Aliyev, at the International Media Forum in the city of Kankendi, gave the main advice to Ukraine: never agree to occupation, and also not to surrender or accept violations of territorial integrity. And after that, the Kremlin began to actively and openly threaten Azerbaijan with declaring war. Well, or as they call it, a special military operation. Moreover, the Russians, in classic fashion, stated that the Azerbaijanis themselves are provoking them to aggression. Member of the Human Rights Council under the President of Russia, Kirill Kabanov, stated, and I quote, "In his public speech, Aliyev openly and definitively demonstrated his unfriendly attitude toward Russia and his contempt for us. But he also openly and quite specifically supported our enemies, Ukraine, without choosing his words carefully. Maybe now they'll tell us the story that he was just very upset because of the successful airstrikes by the Russian army on Azerbaijani oil refineries on Ukrainian territory. And that's why he allowed himself to make such negative and emotional statements. It can be assumed with a high degree of probability that the confrontation will intensify, and certainly not at Russia's initiative." And now, the most interesting part. The Minister of Internal Policy of the Kaluga region, Oleg Kalugin, stated that cosmetic measures alone are not enough against Azerbaijani bandits at the regional level. Systematic measures are needed to eradicate everything related to this state invented by Lenin from our country. Well, let me remind you, according to Russians, Lenin also invented Ukraine. So there's something to think about here. Even the Ukrainian traitor Oleg Tsaryov came out in public and made a statement, quote, "The Azerbaijani president is keeping the beaten and arrested Russian citizens as hostages, refusing to release them. Azerbaijanis in Russia should get ready. The Azerbaijani diaspora in Russia is one of the wealthiest, at least it has been until now. Everything can change quickly." Meanwhile, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov asserts that Moscow and Baku's differing views on the Ukraine situation should not harm the basis of their bilateral cooperation. From the very beginning, President Ilham Aliyev took a certain position that is different from ours. We disagree on this issue. Although later, the same Peskov stated that the Kremlin would demand respect for Russians in Azerbaijan from Baku. And now some experts claim that Azerbaijan will supposedly lose more from this confrontation, and that's why Azerbaijan will most likely be the first to back down. However, Azerbaijan has not shown any conciliatory gestures yet. And in fact, it is Russia that loses more from the conflict with Azerbaijan, especially in the context of the war against Ukraine. Russian officials will likely start to back down, with Peskov already taking the first steps in this direction. Let's start with the issue of trade and money. The trade turnover between Russia and Azerbaijan in 2024 amounted to just under $5 billion. Well, that's not that much. Russia took third place among Azerbaijan's trading partners after Italy and Turkey. But it's telling that trade turnover with Russia grew by 10% last year, and in the first half of this year, it increased by 25% compared to the same period of the previous year. But there's a nuance here. The main components of Russian exports to Azerbaijan are oil, gas and petroleum products, precious metals and metallurgical products, while Azerbaijan mainly supplies fruits and vegetables to Russia. And so, at first glance, Azerbaijan is almost critically dependent on Russia, while Russia is not so dependent on Azerbaijan. Russia's share in Azerbaijan's foreign trade turnover exceeds 10%, while Azerbaijan's share in Russia's foreign trade last year was only 0.6%. However, for Russia, which is under unprecedented sanctions pressure, any partner willing to maintain trade with it becomes disproportionately important. Let me explain why. Good relations with Baku are crucial to Moscow in areas where it has suffered from international sanctions. For example, Azerbaijan is among the countries through which Russia can receive dual-use goods that are necessary for its military-industrial complex. After the start of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, according to its own statistics, Turkey has sharply increased its purchases of dual-use goods in the West by more than 1.5 times and supplies them to a number of countries neighboring Russia, including Azerbaijan. At the same time, as the newspaper discovered in its investigation, these countries, especially Azerbaijan, do not reflect comparable volumes of imports in their own statistics. In other words, the products seem to disappear. That is, Turkey buys them in the West, then passes them on to Azerbaijan, and that's it, they're gone. Where all these products went after that is supposedly unknown. Most of these products likely end up in Russia, but their subsequent movement goes unrecorded. Because there are certain goods that Azerbaijan doesn't actually need at all. Some projects are in plain sight. Azerbaijan is important to Russia for the transit of goods in trade with Iran and the countries of the Persian Gulf. Together with other partners, Moscow and Baku are developing the north-south transport corridors. This is a railway route connecting Russia with the Indian Ocean through Iran. And what do you think? Could Azerbaijan block its part of this route? Actually, easily. And then Russia would be completely cut off from Iran and the Persian Gulf countries. From a military standpoint, it seems that Azerbaijan would be far too weak against its opponent in the event of Russian aggression. But again, that's just my first impression. In this context, for some reason, many people forget about the Shusha Declaration of 2021, which was signed between Azerbaijan and Turkey. And the main idea of this document, the Shusha Declaration, was voiced back in 2021 by the President of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. And it goes like this: 2 countries, 1 army. In fact, Turkey, as a NATO member, has committed to defending Azerbaijan in the event of aggression. Will Russia dare to mess with Turkey? Yeah, that's unlikely. So, friends, there's something to think about here. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care, everyone. Bye. Subtitles created by